the first ever Labour and Cooperative MP to be a Shadow Chancellor. At our first annual conference in this great city of Liverpool since 1925. And thank you to Norma and to all the members of our Policy Commission for their hard work this year, and to all the delegates who've made speeches this morning in this debate, and particularly for showing that debate is still alive, to Rhiannon and to Rory. Brilliant speeches. Thank you very much indeed. And I want to say a special thank you to my co-chair, to Kath Spate, for all her advice and leadership as a member of the NEC for the past 11 years. Kath, you've been a great servant to your union and to our party, and we thank you. And conference, I'd also like to pay tribute to our leader, to my friend Ed Miliband. On Libya, on phone hacking, and on the riots, he's shown calm and resolute and courageous leadership. He's not been afraid to take on vested interests. He's been passionate that we have responsibility from top to bottom in our society, determined that the promise of Britain that the next generation will do better than the last can be fulfilled. Conference, in Ed Miliband, we have a leader who is genuine, principled, honest and fair, a leader who speaks his mind and tells the truth, a leader in whom I believe we can ask the British people to put their trust. And nowhere is it more important that we ask the British people to put their trust than in their trust in an alternative future, a better way forward than on the economy. Speaking to one delegate last night, she said to me, there aren't enough jobs, prices are going up, there must be a better way. And here in Liverpool, as a result of this coalition's policies, unemployment is now rising again as this city faces the deepest cuts to local services in a generation. But a far cry from the scuttling taxis delivering redundancy notices in the 1980s, it is a Labour council here in Liverpool which is working night and day to make the savings and cut the bureaucracy so they can protect jobs and secure services for the most vulnerable in this city. And I say to Labour's leader here in Liverpool, to Joe Anderson, to all our Labour leaders in local government across the UK, to First Minister Carwyn Jones in Wales, we pay tribute to your leadership, your responsibility, your determination that there can be a better way. Yes, a credible plan to get our deficit down, but action now, a plan for growth and jobs, long-term reforms to build a stronger, fairer economy, a Labour plan to get Britain working again. But conference, let's face the facts. These are the darkest, most dangerous times, certainly in my lifetime. Britain, the world, is facing the threat of something that most of us have never read about other than in the history books, a decade of economic stagnation. The aftermath of a worldwide financial and banking crisis, families and businesses fearful about the future, cutting back on spending and investment, governments all around the world trying at the same time to cut their spending, demand sucked out of our economies, stock markets tumbling, banks in trouble, economy stalling, unemployment rising, a vicious circle as slow growth or no growth makes it harder to get our deficits down. Not a crisis of any one country or one continent, but a spiralling global crisis from which no economy can be safe, threatening the jobs, the pensions, the living standards of families here in Britain and all across the world. Conference, this is not, as the Conservatives claim, simply a crisis of public debt which can be solved country by country through austerity, cuts and retrenchment, but truly a global growth crisis which is deepening and darkening by the day. And the world must remember the lesson of the 30s, that there is no credibility in piling austerity on austerity, tax rise on tax rise, cut on cut, in the eventual hope that it will work when all the evidence is pointing the other way. I said to you a year ago, conference, you either learn the lessons of history or you repeat the mistakes of history. That is the choice the world faces today. But at a time when the world so desperately needs a global plan for growth, when they need wise and strong leadership, where will that leadership come from? Not so far from Eurozone countries, unable to stand together and do what it takes to restore confidence and growth. Not so far from the United States, deadlocked by the dangerous games of the Republican right. And conference, what about our Prime Minister and our Chancellor? Do they urge a change of course in the Eurozone? No, they applaud austerity and urge even deeper cuts. Do they urge a change of course in America? No, George Osborne boasts that his Republican friends in Congress are following his advice. Do they urge a global growth plan in the G7, the G20, the IMF? No, confronted with the biggest, most urgent global challenge of our lifetimes, all they can do is urge other countries to pile austerity on austerity too, ignoring the lessons of history, even though the evidence here in Britain and all around the world is that it is not working. That is not just a failure of leadership, it is an abdication of responsibility too. The conference. It's not right to blame David Cameron and George Osborne for everything that's wrong with our economy. They didn't cause the global financial crisis. That crisis was a body blow to our economy, to our public finances. We went into recession, we lost tax revenues, a big deficit opened up. Whoever won the last election faced difficult tasks to secure recovery, to reduce that deficit over time. And that task has been made harder by the recent problems in the Eurozone, in America, in Japan. But the simple question the government has to answer is this, the question which they must be held to account for: have the decisions they've made in the last year and a half made things better, or have they made things worse? A year ago, I warned that our economy was still too fragile, that as a global hurricane was brewing, it was not the time to tear out the foundations of the house. But David Cameron and George Osborne thought they knew better. They said a VAT cut rise and cutting faster than any other major economy would boost confidence and growth. They said if you cut public sector jobs, then private sector jobs would more than fill the gap. They said their plan would make Britain immune from the global storm, that any other course of action would cause stock market turmoil. And to be fair, some respected people agreed with them. But we in this party argued for a steadier, more balanced approach to halve the deficit in 4 years. We said going too far too fast would choke off the recovery and put jobs at risk. We warned that if you cut spending and taxes rose too fast, you'd get a vicious circle here in Britain too and make it harder to get the deficit down. And look what's happened even before the global instability of the last 3 months. Confidence has slumped. Our economy has flatlined now for 9 months. Slower growth in Britain than any other G7 country except Japan. Unemployment now rising again. Borrowing set to be £46 billion higher than they planned, because if you choke off the recovery, if you put tens of thousands of people on the dole, not paying taxes, getting benefits instead, then borrowing doesn't go down, it goes up. In the 80s, the Tories told us, shockingly, that because their economic objective was to reduce inflation, they said that raising unemployment, higher unemployment, was a price worth paying. This generation of Tories need to realise, if your economic objective is to reduce the deficit, then rising unemployment is one thing you just can't afford. So, conference. The global economic crisis is deepening. Our economy is badly exposed. And what do we hear from ministers? However bad things get, even when they can see it's not working, we are sticking to the plan, they say. We are not for turning. There's no alternative. There's no better way. They claim any change of course would lead to a market crisis and higher interest rates. But our interest rates are at record lows because our economy is stagnating. Markets are losing confidence in governments all around the world because there's no growth. And there is a growing chorus of voices calling for a change of course. Even the IMF now says growth is necessary for fiscal credibility, and they say slamming on the brakes too quickly will hit the recovery and worsen job prospects. Yes, a credible economic policy does need a plan to get the deficit down. Yes, a credible economic policy does need political agreement to implement that plan. But an economic policy can only be credible if it works, and George Osborne's economic plan is hurting, but conference, it's just not working. But you all heard the chorus from the Liberal Democrats last week. You know what we'll hear next week from the Tories. The only line in the script they've got left. It's all Labour's fault, they say. We're just clearing up the mess. Conference. We could spend all our time defending our record. And there is much to be proud of. But for families today struggling to pay the bills, worrying about their jobs, being told about the great things Labour did in government, it doesn't pay the bills, secure the job, it doesn't secure the pension. Some commentators say the opposite. Accept the Tory critique that Labour spending caused the crisis, back Tory policy on the deficit, neutralise the issue and move on. And when they say we made mistakes in government, they're right. We have to admit them and show we've learned. The 75p pension rise, that was a mistake. So was abolishing the 10p tax rate. We didn't do enough to get all employers to train their workforces. We should have adopted tougher controls on migration from Eastern Europe. We didn't spend every pound of public money well. And yes, we didn't regulate the banks toughly enough and stop their gross irresponsibility here in Britain and all around the world. But don't let anyone tell you that Labour in government was profligate with public money when we went into this crisis with lower national debt that we inherited in 1997 and lower national debt than America, Germany, France and Japan. And don't let anyone say it was public spending on public services here in Britain which caused the global financial crisis. It wasn't too many police officers or nurses or teachers here in Britain that caused the Lehman Brothers investment bank to go bankrupt in New York. Conference. We didn't get everything right. We made mistakes. But abolishing the Future Jobs Fund and cutting 100,000 jobs for young people, that wasn't Labour's mistake. Scrapping the regional development agencies, ending EMAs, cutting childcare tax credit for working parents, those aren't Labour's mistakes. Wasting £2 billion on a reckless NHS reorganisation, wasting £100 million on elected police commissioners, wasting £1 billion on a tax cut for the banks, billions more on rising unemployment, ripping up our balanced plan, trying to get the deficit down faster and choking off the recovery at the same time. Conference, those aren't Labour's mistakes. They're David Cameron's mistakes and George Osborne's mistakes and Nick Clegg's mistakes. Reckless, ideological, unfair, Tory economic mistakes, every one of them. I think of a family I know in my constituency, self-employed, a husband and wife team. Times are hard at the moment, but things are just about okay. They can pay the mortgage. They managed a holiday with the kids this year. but they're worried. Worried about gas bills rising, petrol, food all going up. Worried about losing their tax credits and their child benefit. Worried when they see other local businesses close down. Worried too about the future. Can they keep up their pension payments? Can they afford for their son and daughter to go to college? Better off under Labour. But it was their hard work which did it. Deeply aspirational for their children, but worried about their futures. Believe me, they don't want to hear from us about all the good things we did in government. Believe me, they certainly do want to know we've learned from mistakes we made. But most important, they want to know there's a reason to be hopeful, that their hard work can be rewarded, that their children can do well. They want to know that there is a better way. Conference, trying to cut the deficit too far too fast isn't working. The government must adopt a steadier, more balanced plan to get our deficit down and take immediate action now to support the economy and create jobs here in Britain. So here are 5 immediate steps the government can and should take right now. Step 1, repeat the bank bonus tax again this year. Use the money to build 25,000 affordable homes, guarantee a job for 100,000 young people. It can't be right to be cutting taxes on the banks when 1 in 5 young people are out of work. Step 2, genuinely bring forward long-term investment projects now. Schools, transport, roads, get people back to work and strengthen our economy for the future. Step 3, announce an immediate 1-year cut in VAT to 5% on home improvements, repairs and maintenance to help homeowners and the many small businesses that are so dependent on the state of the housing market. Step 4, reverse January's damaging VAT rise now for a temporary period, a £450 boost for a family with 2 kids, immediate help for our high street and help for struggling families and pensioners too. And step 5, a one-year national insurance tax break for every small firm which takes on extra workers, using the money left over from the government's failed national rebate for new businesses, helping small businesses to grow and create jobs. Conference, that is a plan to help struggling families and small businesses to get our economy growing and create jobs, which are the key to getting our deficit down. Action on jobs, investment brought forward, support for families, support for homeowners, support for small businesses, 5 immediate steps the government could take tomorrow. If they do so, we will back them. Call it Plan A, call it Plan B, call it Plan C. I don't care what they call it. Britain just needs a plan that works. But I have to level with you all in the country. A plan for growth now can help the economy get moving again. It can stop the vicious circle on the deficit. By itself, it doesn't secure our economic future. It doesn't magic away the deficit. A steadier, more balanced, medium-term plan to get the deficit down will still mean difficult decisions and tough choices in the years ahead that any government will face. Tough choices on tax and spending, like the cuts to welfare, education and Home Office budgets we announced in government, discipline in public and private sector pay, and no matter how much we dislike particular Tory spending cuts or tax rises, we cannot make promises now to reverse them. I won't do that, neither will my shadow cabinet colleagues. And while we know the government's approach to pensions has been confrontational and unfair, there is nothing George Osborne would like better than a strike this autumn to divert attention away from his failing economic plan. We do know, too, there are difficult decisions on pensions, which we can't duck, and that under Labour, contributions and the retirement age would have been rising too. Conference, it won't be enough to expose David Cameron and George Osborne's mistakes that they've got the economy badly wrong. We still know today what we recognised 17 years ago, that you can never have credibility unless you have the discipline and the strength to take tough decisions. When I left the Financial Times to work for Labour in 1994, it was because I knew that a reputation for credibility and a platform of stability were the preconditions of everything we wanted to achieve, and I wanted to play my part. And conference, Bank of England independence, not joining the euro, levelling with the public that saving the NHS needed a tax rise, using all the £22 billion windfall from the sale of the 3G mobile phone auction to repay national debt, despite Tory demands to spend it at the time. That same discipline that guided those decisions, that same iron discipline, must guide a future Labour government too. So let me say two things today. First, before the election, and based on the circumstances we face, we will set out for our manifesto tough fiscal rules that the next Labour government will have to stick to get our country's current budget back to balance and national debt on a downward path. And those fiscal rules will be independently monitored by the Office for Budget Responsibility. And second, we know that even as bank shares are falling again, David Cameron and Nick Clegg are still betting on a windfall gain from privatising RBS and Lloyds to pay for a pre-election giveaway. We could also pledge to spend that windfall. But just as with the 3G mobile phone auction, we will commit instead in our manifesto to do the responsible thing and use any windfall gain from the sale of bank shares to repay the national debt. Conference, that will be Labour's choice. Fiscal responsibility in the national interest. And on that platform of fiscal responsibility, an action now for jobs and growth, our 5-point plan, we've also got to build the long-term future for the British economy. And that means government must act to ensure markets work in the public interest and, as Ed has said, tackle unfair concentrations of power. Many of us have had enough experience of government to know that the public sector can fail too, that Whitehall doesn't always know best, that well-meaning business regulations designed by public servants can sometimes do more harm than good in the real world, that central direction shouted ever more loudly by ministers are no substitute for proper reforms that get incentives right, tackle market failures and put power in the hands of users. But we know too that government just walking away is not the answer. The government has a vital role to play, working closely with business in making our economy stronger and more balanced for the long term. John Denham, Liam Byrne, Angela Eagle and I, we're all working together on our new financial, industrial and employment policies. We can't claim we've got all the answers at this stage, but we know we can't tackle our skills deficit unless both government and employers do more. We can't have a modern industrial policy without government action to support new manufacturing technologies, including green manufacturing, to make the planning system work to support investment and jobs, and yes, to ensure a genuinely level playing field for procurement. And we can't tackle the debilitating short-termism which still plagues the relationship between finance and industry in Britain without radical reforms that must go beyond the tough regulation of the banks that the Vickers Commission has proposed. That is why Ed Miliband, John Denham and I are determined that Labour will lead a debate on how to tackle short-termism in our economy, including tackling market failures in small business lending, and that means we must now examine proposals for a national investment bank for small business. Conference. These are vital reforms. Reforms upon which the future of our country depends. But they're reforms which the government just can't deliver. Because to back these reforms means to reject the debilitating ideology, private always good, public always bad, rising inequality inevitable, which grips this Tory-led government. It's the same view that says government is always the problem, getting government out of the way always the solution, and that somehow rewards at the top will eventually trickle down. It's the same ideology that says private companies running the health service will always be better for patients, that says cutting police officers, youth services and family intervention projects will somehow make our communities safer, that claims we're all in this together, but then delivers budgets that hits families with children, that hit women more than men, and hit people with disabilities hardest of all. Above all, it is the same ideology that believes the global financial crisis was caused by too much public spending, and that because they are cutting public spending faster than ever in our history, that somehow Britain is a safe haven. A safe haven. With unemployment rising, with our economy flatlining, how can David Cameron and George Osborne claim that Britain is a safe haven? It may be a safe haven for those who don't need to work, for those with independent means, for those for whom £9,000 a year tuition fees is small change. It may be a safe haven for David Cameron, George Osborne, Boris Johnson and their friends. But for the 16,000 companies that have gone out of business in the last year, Tory Britain is not a safe haven. For the young people losing their EMA this term, for the women seeing their pensions cut, for the families seeing their child benefit taken away, for the million young people now out of work, Tory Britain is no safe haven. And for the millions of families now struggling with higher bills, worrying about their jobs, what their children's future hold, Britain is no safe haven for them at all. Conference, true to our values, willing to make the tough decisions, for the sake of our economy, for all the British people, Labour must win the argument. We must show that there is a reason to hope, that there is a better future, there is a better way. Thank you.